Okay, so last little bit on Chapter 8. We went over Marbury versus Madison, but just so you can see it spelled out, just in case you were curious on that one. But this is, we're going to look at looking at the movement towards the War of 1812. So with political parties, there was a lot of division amongst them. Federalists were becoming the minority. Many more people are becoming Democrat, Republican at that point. Aaron Burr was kind of on the side of all of that too. He was a Federalist. He had some bad choices. He had challenged Alexander Hamilton to a duel. This had come out of the election of being governor for New York. Hamilton had said some negative things about Aaron Burr. He felt like he'd been dishonored, so he challenges him to a duel and then kills Alexander Hamilton in this duel. Not a good choice. He's wanted for murder basically in 3 states at that point. But also it's going to isolate him from many of his Federalist friends because Alexander Hamilton was such a beloved Federalist and really the favorite of the political party. So he has to move on from that point, begins to work on a movement to try to maybe get the West to secede with him, to break off from the Union and start their own group, their own country. He is caught, tried for treason, but is not convicted. John Marshall presided over that case, and John Marshall wanted to make sure that it wasn't something to where the presidents could come in and just say, I don't like this person, try them for treason and get them thrown in jail. So it kept to a very strict definition of treason. Levying wars against the U.S. or adhering to their enemies, but it requires 2 witnesses, and because they could not produce 2 witnesses against Aaron Burr, they will let him go and not convict him of treason. War in Europe is beginning to build. The Napoleonic Wars are going on between France and England. France was really controlling the land side, and British controlled the seas, and it made a hard time for the U.S. They had blockades of each other's ports. The Orders in Council for the British basically saying that we couldn't trade with the French, and the French had the Berlin and Milan decrees basically saying the same thing, that both sides being able to, or justifying their ability to seize ships from Americans if they thought that those goods were going to be used for war against them. The British even took it more and would not only take the ships but also the people, and take those people and make them part of the British Navy. It's called impressment, basically kidnapping Americans and making them part of the British Navy. And so it's a big fighting point for many Americans. The shipping was definitely having a hard time with Jefferson. He called it peaceable coercion. He passed the Embargo Act 1807, prohibiting all exports of American goods, basically telling the American ships, if you stay home, you're safe, and keeping American ships there. It fails because of all the smuggling that happens, and it's really hard to enforce. Madison becomes president after Jefferson, and we begin to go towards war because Madison, looking at the fact that there's a big push for war by groups in the U.S., the war hawks. He tried to kind of go back and forth with different trade policies, saying, well, we'll start trading with everybody else except for the British and the French. I can't talk this morning. The French and the British, but that didn't go very well and didn't go according to plan. And then they would say, okay, well, we'll trade with everybody, but if you respect our rights, then we'll stop trading with your enemy. And so those were basically, that was Macon's Bill number 2. And then eventually we will just resume trade because nothing we were doing at that point was working with the embargo. It was hurting our trade way more than it was hurting them. The whole idea behind peaceable coercion was if you withhold those goods from them, then that'll be an incentive for them to come back and actually respect American shipping rights. Declaration of war for 3 reasons. To protest the British Orders in Council, and this is a declaration of war on the British, not the French. But we wanted to protest the British Orders in Council, basically saying the Royal Navy could interfere with American shipping, to stop impressment, and to end the British encouragement of west and northern frontiers with Native American attacks, with keeping their presence, and we thought, hey, maybe if we take Canada, then we can basically expel the British from North America overall. So we definitely moved towards war. When we were declaring war, it was very poorly timed because the British were basically signing a proclamation to repeal the Orders in Council to respect American shipping rights at the same time that we were declaring war on them. So had we waited a couple more weeks, the whole thing possibly could have been avoided. So shipping rights impressment, the major two causes at that point. Very ill prepared to go to war. The military was weak, poorly funded. Trade was, next to nothing because of all the problems that we'd had. In the north, there was a three-pronged attack with on the Canadian side. We moving along the different areas in the north. With the south, we have Battle of Horseshoe Bend, Andrew Jackson destroying the Creek British forces. Napoleon's empire was collapsing, and the British are starting to focus more on the U.S., so it made it a little more difficult. I'm going to skip through some of this. Battle of New Orleans, because really you don't need to know a lot of the specific battles, except for the Battle of New Orleans. That's a good one to know. With the Battle of New Orleans, it was a major win for Andrew Jackson and the Americans. It really makes him well known, and that's really what comes out of this. It's a big kind of boost for American morale at that point. The Treaty of Ghent is going to be signed to end the War of 1812 and 1814. And these American delegates and British delegates got together and said no more impressments, no more blockades, no more British in the territories where the U.S. had been, and demands were kind of made on both sides. But in the end, they agreed to end the war, return the prisoners, restore previous boundaries, and absolutely nothing else. So for the Treaty of Ghent, what did it accomplish? What were the provisions? They stopped fighting. That's all it was. It was just a glorified ceasefire. The Hartford Convention was basically one last thing on this. This convention had proposed 7 constitutional amendments designed to limit Republican and Southern influence, getting rid of the counting of slaves in representation, getting rid of any embargoes, any of that could come in. A lot of the frustrations from the Federalists, and the Federalists had done all this and proposed all of these amendments and things and trying to counter the Republicans and their influence, but they were really poorly timed as they're marching on Washington with these constitutional amendment demands, and they're very puffed up about their differences and what they wanted. The War of 1812 is going to end. Treaty of Ghent is signed. Battle of New Orleans. People are super happy because really both sides think that they won in the War of 1812. The Americans think they won. The British think that they won. We both had similar amounts of damage. They burned down the White House. Very famous story of Dolly Madison, Mrs. Madison, saving the portrait of George Washington when the White House burned down. But both sides think that they won. But when the war ended and American morale is so high, and people are starting to push for that, that Hartford Convention demands, it made them look almost treasonous to come in and say we have severe problems with the way the country is being run when people were all of a sudden so very proud of it. And so the Hartford Convention basically means the death of the Federalist Party. After that, Federalists were weakened. They were almost seen as traitors, and so nobody claimed to be a Federalist at that point. So the going back and forth between the two was pretty much done. We go into this thing called Era of Good Feelings, where it's really just one political party, where everyone said they were Democrat, Republican. Now, do people still believe everything the Democrat, Republicans believe? No, but they're not about to say that they're Federalists without being driven out of any government positions or jobs. So, aftermath of the War of 1812, lots of nationalism, lots of optimism, economic independence as we grew American manufacturing, and the whole political parties is going to just get rearranged, and we'll go over that in the next unit.